All right. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. I kept thinking yesterday was Friday. And I was like, oh wait, I still have to work. Happy Friday, actual Friday. Thanks for coming. Those of you on Zoom, those of you in person, send the drinks. Many thanks to Foothill, Zach, Sharon, and Sophia for organizing this. And for supporting this whole series. It's super important. Topic today is ensuring critical thinking with generative AI, and I am Chesa Caparas. I'll do a brief introduction in a minute. Just real quick, folks on Zoom, can you give a thumbs up? Can you hear everything okay? Yeah. Okay, cool, thank you. Awesome. Oh, and of course, my clicker is not working, but my laptop's right here, so. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna just be flow of this workshop, this session. I'm gonna do a quick introduction, then kind of an overview of just like why we're here, why we're talking about this. And then I do wanna kind of share some recent research on critical thinking and generative AI. I hope it's not too boring, but I think it's kind of important for us to think about as we move into this, year 3-ish of life with ChatGPT. And then I wanna talk about critical thinking. And this is kind of geared for classroom faculty for some activities for ensuring critical thinking, but hopefully you can also practice them in your own life. Doesn't just have to be in the classroom. And then we'll do Q&A. So I hope that sounds good. All right. So who am I? For those of you who don't know me, I teach English. English and Asian American Studies at Anza. Very happy to be here at Foothill. I've been teaching critical thinking and digital literacy for like more than 10 years. It started talking about social media and how that's impacting relationships and how search engines are impacting the way we think. And now, of course, it's AI and generative AI and how that's impacting like everything, like down to our sense of reality, which is no longer a shared sense of reality. Another one of my roles is AI faculty innovator in residence through California Learning Lab. So I've been doing the statewide intersegmental learning community on AI and teaching. So that's between community colleges, Cal States, and UCs, trying to think about pathways for AI. And a lot of this work was informed by my sabbatical project, part of which was spent as a Fulbright scholar to the Philippines, studying media and information literacy during their elections. So thinking about the connection between democracy and media and information literacy. And so I want to just do a quick shout out to the artist of this picture. This is from when I taught study abroad in the Philippines last summer. We got to visit an artist community and they did portraits of all of us. And when I was thinking about like, what image to put in my like introductory slide, I was like, oh, I have so many AI generated images in this slide deck, but I also wanted to honor like actual human artists who like sit there and do the work, the labor of actually trying to capture what they see with their hands, with pencil on paper, because I do feel like it is something that we still need to hold on to and actually maintains more value the more AI generated stuff / crap gets out there. It's really important to honor the work of like human artists and like human creativity. So I wanted to put that there, and you can see the artist name, Juan Vanessa, down there. Okay, all right. So why talk about critical thinking now? If you've talked to any of your colleagues, it's the biggest concern about ChatGPT or generative AI and the impact that it's having on not just our students, but on our colleagues, our peers, our family members, society, voters or non-voters, right? Like it's a really important topic. And I do think that I share a lot of the concerns that people express about what is happening to critical thinking as certain cognitive tasks get offloaded onto machines, right? And so hopefully this presentation will be a little bit about, like, I do want to share some research, not my own, but I do want to share some research and then try to think about what does it mean for our work, right? Or, as educators or as students or as, administrators, everybody who's involved in education or who cares about learning, like that's why I think we should talk about it now, because there's a big shift happening in education. So just for some context, another reason why we're talking about this right now is, luckily enough, I mean, we couldn't have planned this better. Earlier this month, an article came out about the impact of generative AI on critical thinking. And it was a self-reported study. They did surveys with knowledge workers. A lot of them were coders, so computer, programmers, that kind of stuff. Self-reported reductions in cognitive effort and confidence effects from a survey of knowledge workers. So I'm going to share some of that. I'm going to try and make it accessible. Yes, I had to digest all the methods and the results and charts and stuff. So hopefully this isn't too boring. But if you want to read the article, there's this is the full title. You can find it on.
That's doing critical thinking.
Question? Okay. All right. Cool. So, just real quick, if any of you have done curriculum, you've probably seen this before. You know this very well. It is the foundation of how the researchers Lee et al. Define critical thinking in their study, because they think it's sort of like the simplest model for understanding how critical thinking works. It sort of builds in this pyramid upon sort of basic, just remembering information, understanding information, applying it, analyzing it, evaluating it, and creating new work. Okay, so that's sort of this model of critical thinking that they're looking at. They break it down into these 6 different categories in terms of the different cognitive tasks that people do when they're engaging with generative AI. You don't have to memorize it. I'm not going to quiz you. I'm not going to tell you to use verb first language or anything like that. Question.
The one on the bottom, remember, that's the one I have a big, problem with, which computers don't,
Yeah.
remember something.
I know. And it gets worse when we're I don't have to remember that because I'm just going to offload that task to my phone and have it remember it for me. So the reason I wanted to show this is because I think it's really important to know that there are different types of tasks for which you can use generative AI, right? All the different parts of that pyramid, generative AI can help you with. It can help you remember things. It can help you recall information, quiz me on this article I was supposed to read. It can also create new things, write an essay based on this article that I was supposed to read, right? So it's really important when we're thinking about how we create policies around AI usage, right? Because students can use generative AI, or all of us can use AI for various levels of that pyramid, right? Various tasks in which we might engage with AI technologies. So if you just have this blanket statement about AI is not allowed, it's kind of confusing because some people use AI to brainstorm, some people use AI to revise, some people use AI to summarize things. So you kind of have to be a little bit more nuanced about what we're talking about when we talk about AI use. And I feel like that's one of the first steps of critical thinking, is knowing that there are a lot of different ways you can use these tools, and a lot of different ways that students can use these tools in our classes. So for example, Grammarly, right, is something that hopefully students will generate some writing and it'll offer them suggestions for a new vocabulary, right? Or how to fix a sentence, or those kinds of things. But sometimes students are just I just have a question about how to make money online, right? And it gives you, you can Google things and it'll give you an AI overview. So that is another example of generative AI use. So again, when we're trying to regulate how we're using generative AI, I think it's really important to remember that there's a lot of different tasks that you can use it for, and different levels of tasks require different kinds of critical thinking, right? There's one more point on this slide. So, something to reflect on, either as a, classroom instructor who is trying to create a policy, or even a student who wants to use generative AI, which tasks do you want to offload to the tools, right? Because when you do offload them, you are kind of removing that responsibility and that learning process from yourself, right? So is it that I don't want to remember something, I don't want to read something, I don't want to revise or edit something? I think it's really important to have more nuance when we're talking about what we do with these tools. Good so far? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Makes sense? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. People on Zoom, thumbs up, reaction emoji, anything? Laughing, crying? Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Cool. So in the study, they tried to look at the different levels of the pyramid, right? And which tasks these knowledge workers used with generative AI for, and how they felt about their own usage. Did it reduce, decrease or increase their level of critical thinking? So what they found is that there were shifts in critical thinking, right? For things that require just knowledge and comprehension. Did I understand the text? The effort, critical thinking effort, shifts from gathering information to verifying information. Okay? And this is something you can also think about if you're, in the classroom trying to teach how to use these tools. Like maybe it's not about find research, but it's about find research and decide if it's actually legit, right? Is this real or is it a hallucination? For the application level of critical thinking, they noticed that knowledge workers shift from actually trying to solve the problem using tools to integrating AI's response into their, like how they address the problem. So here it's kind of where, those people talk about augmenting your skills. It's like, okay, AI gave me an answer and I have to see, does that answer fit with what I'm trying to do for this task, right? So how to integrate AI's response into the work that you're actually doing. And then for the analysis, synthesis, and evaluation part, the effort shift from task execution to task stewardship. And this kind of relates to, you've probably read some like Forbes or Business Insider articles that said people aren't going to have to manage tasks anymore. They're going to have to manage AI to do tasks, right? And that's kind of where this is. Like, this is what it's talking about. It's not about like, how do I write the email and, write the report and do the research, gather the information. It's more, how do I decide which tasks to delegate to the different tools? Does that make sense? Okay. So just kind of ways to think about where our critical thinking efforts are shifting. And folks have these slides, or they'll be provided the slides afterward. I'm fine with it. Yeah. This is not my research anyway. This is from the article that I cited. So other results that the study found was there are specific motivators for actually increases in critical thinking, right? And so I feel like this is really important for those of us who are trying to encourage more of it for ourselves or for our students. Work quality really motivated an increase in critical thinking. That means that even though they were using generative AI, the study participants wanted to improve AI's responses. Right? They were like, oh, okay, like I think this is a good start, and now I'm going to build off of this. Another motivator for critical thinking, and what I take that to mean is like they don't just accept generative AI's output and copy and paste, but they're actually trying to do something with it. Another motivator was avoiding potential negative outcomes, right? Checking for wrong answers, making sure it doesn't have outdated information or faulty reasoning. And a lot of this is like, again, a lot of them were like sort of computer programmer knowledge workers. And so it was like, oh, checking their mathematical reasoning, like those kinds of things. But also trying to avoid social conflict. So for example, if, the generative AI was writing an email for them, they were like, I want to make sure that I'm not going to get canceled for this email that generative AI wrote. Is it like, am I being culturally sensitive and all of these things? So that was another motivator for critical thinking. And then another motivator that they found was just wanting to develop their own skills, right? So basically when people were using generative AI for tasks, they were motivated to think critically because they wanted to see if they could do it independently of generative AI in the future. So those are some important things like for our own work and again for our students, like how do we motivate them to want them to do that, right? To actually improve their skills rather than just depend on these tools to do the work for them. Of course, there are barriers to critical thinking, right? And this is also what the study found. Awareness barriers was, the first one that they listed, and that's basically when the user is unaware of potential harms. And this is why I think it's super, super important that even if you don't want them to use AI, or you don't want to use it yourself, it's important to know how the technologies work so that you are aware of some of the potential harms that they could cause, right? And I know that that's a big ask for some people. Some people are like, I'm just going to pretend that it doesn't exist, and that's real. But it's really hard to mitigate the harms of a technology if you don't know how it works and how people are using it. This one, I think, is probably the most relevant for us. Motivation barrier is just not having enough time, right? I don't engage with critical thinking because I need to get this report done. I need to get this paper done. I need to respond to 5,000 emails. And so I don't have enough time to check everything and ensure that it's, valid or, not problematic. So I think that that's the motivation barrier is like, we're not motivated because we just don't have enough time to engage in critical thinking for all the tasks that we have. Another motivation barrier was people are just like, it's outside of my job description. Somebody made me have to write this report. I don't feel invested in it. I don't feel like this is part of my job. So I'm just going to do it because I have to do it, but I don't feel like it's part of my role. Like I'm not, like my identity as like somebody doing this work is not tied to the actual outcome. And then lastly, a barrier to critical thinking was just ability, right? If you have to do a task that is outside of your domain expertise and you rely on generative AI and you're like, I can't critique the output because I don't even understand what I'm looking at. It sounds good, but I don't know if it's true or not. So that's another barrier to critical thinking. And I feel like this also happens a lot with our students, happens a lot with ourselves. Sometimes we go to generative AI or previously we go to Google or Wikipedia, be like, can you explain this concept to me? And if you don't know whether or not it's accurate, then you're not going to know whether you can. It's hard to think critically about it because you don't know what you don't know. Again, another case for AI literacy. Good so far?
Yeah.
Cool. Interesting?
Mhm.
Okay, making
Very
sense?
interesting.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Feel free to read the article. It's fascinating, yeah. So I do want to kind of transition into like more practical stuff. I know folks, especially faculty, are like, I need some takeaways, I need some concrete applications of this stuff. So want to talk about some classroom activities that can promote critical thinking. But big caveat first is like the reality of getting buy-in, right? Again, this is the part of that motivation barrier, right? It's really difficult. And I asked Copilot, I was like, give me an image of kids like going to school. And I thought this was great because you don't know if they're running to school or running away from school. You know what I mean? It's like, are they excited to go? Are they excited to leave? Like, I don't know. And I feel the same way. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm really excited to like get in the classroom and to do this work and to, meet new students. It's week 3 and I'm like, yay, I feel like I'm getting to know my students, but it's also, yes, it's lunchtime. But I think it's really challenging. There is this dilemma that we have of like, how do we engage our students and how do we engage ourselves, right? Because, I've given a lot of workshops on teaching and learning with generative AI, and a lot of folks are like really interested, and you can imagine there's a lot of folks who are just like, I don't have time, I don't care, it's gonna take my job, why it's gonna steal my data, and there's a lot of reasons to not engage or to not feel invested in learning about these tools and rethinking how we do what we do. So I just, want to name that. And for the students, right? There are a ton of demands on you. Like at the beginning of the quarter, have a little survey where I ask my students, like, is there anything that is like challenging you that might make it difficult for you to be successful in this class? It could be like, are you working full time? Do you take care of family members? Is English not your first language? Do you have a history of like, bad educational experiences? And a lot of them say, yeah, I work 40 hours a week. I have to drive my younger siblings to school. I take care of my elderly grandmother, or I have dropped out of school and I'm now coming back. Like all of these different things are, could be challenges that make it difficult for students to have buy-in to actually thinking critically with these tools, right? And so that's real. Like we have to name that. And so I offer some of these strategies knowing that they're really effective if you can get the buy-in. But the truth is, like, we're all burnt out. Like, it has been how many years of ChatGPT? It was how many years of COVID? Now we're in this political climate where I'm like, is higher education even going to exist in the next, like, 5 years, I don't know, we have to name that, right? Like, so I recognize that I'm asking us to rethink how we view education, how we view the teaching and learning experience at a time where a lot of us probably don't have any energy to do things differently, right? I mean, not to assume, but is anybody else burnt out? Okay, people on Zoom, I don't know if you can see, but yeah, I mean, let's admit it, I'm tired, I don't want to speak for everybody. And I was lucky enough to have a sabbatical to study this stuff, you know? People who have been teaching full-time, have been going to school full-time, haven't had the space to really reflect on this stuff. And so I acknowledge that, like, if it's a big ask, and so just kind of check in with yourself about what your capacity is for, you know, actually asking some of these questions and you know, doing some of this work. Yeah, Zach?
I was just gonna point out, I don't know if it's appropriate time, but there's a hand in the.
Robert has a.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Hey, Chesa. Hey, so thanks so much. I'd just like to throw out for comment that
Yeah.
when we talk about critical thinking, right? Or when we
Mhm.
think about, are we really reflecting? I want us to think about our brain and how our brain hurts on exams when we're pushing ourselves, right, to that extra level of analysis, right? And pushing deeply into the red zone. And when you talk about critical thinking, one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is just how much brain power, how much cycles, how much ATP, how much glucose we're consuming in these extra, revving activities, and how you can use AI to reduce cognitive load, right?
Mhm.
Cognitive load is what these tools are supposed to help us with. But to absolutely agree with you on, you need to look at output and you need to understand what a tool is creating, especially if you're doing successive iterations of a large workflow, derivative work, right, or passes through data. If you're not reflecting on something, you just go down the wrong road further and further.
Yeah.
But I really like what you said about burnt out. People's heads are tired, and we
Yeah.
live in a world where our heads can get more tired faster.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what these tools can really help with.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much, and I'd love, you know, at some point get the chemistry of it too. Tell me, like, how much glucose do we need? Yeah, oh, another
This
comment?
is kind of a spontaneous question, maybe it relates or not, but is it appropriate that a faculty states absolutely no use of AI except for grammar and spell check?
In
your opinion.
in my opinion, it's up to the faculty to determine what they allow in their class. Yeah, I can't make a blanket statement. I make policy recommendations that are like, you have to decide what you're comfortable with. But I also say, if you're gonna make a policy, you should know what tools you're regulating. Because if people say like no AI use, it's like, what does that mean? Does that mean they're not allowed to use Google ever? You know, does it mean that they can't like watch Netflix or go on social media, right? Because that's all AI, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I found it really humorous, the idea of using AI for spell checking.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. Because it's like already embedded in
Maybe that
there.
kind of gives me a clue on
Yeah.
how the person sees the, you know.
Oh, what the
you know,
tools are.
I've been using technology tools for some time and I see that some people have absolutely no idea of their capabilities,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
as you put it, actually.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Is again, like knowing that there's a lot of nuance to where people are using these tools, right? And how they're using it, yeah. Like, yeah. And again, like I'm not here to tell any person how to do their job. I'm just saying, here's some things to think about as you're doing your job, your work, your, you know, teaching, you're learning, you know, if you're a student. I mean, we're all learning all the time. What else did I want to say? Yeah, and you know, in response to Bob's point or Robert's point, about like, you know, reducing some of the cognitive load. We also, I've balanced that out also with like, there is a certain amount of friction that is needed that does encourage learning, right? And I know I sound like such a dinosaur when I say this, but like going to the library to look for a book and having the physical embodied memory of finding a piece of information makes it a lot stickier than it just being like one of 100 tabs you have open, right? And you know, and that does something to our memory, right? And how we process that information. I'm not saying that we should all like go back to, you know, stone chisels and whatever and like, make like have a ton of friction. I'm just saying that we have to acknowledge that good learning happens in a more fully embodied present state. It's really hard to remember something when it's one of a million pieces of information that you're staring at on the same screen day after day. Just saying.
Can I say something though? As a student,
Yeah.
it's the interaction with the information which is important.
Yes.
And when it's tangible, it sticks much better. And now we have like all our textbooks online, which
Yeah.
is like, I'm sorry, it's not as tangible. It's much harder. But this is the way technology is changing. So how do we teach people to adapt to it? It's harder for me, but younger people have a easier time. But then I see them doing like all their homework on their phones and they don't know what a file system is. Like,
Oh my gosh.
oh my
yeah.
God, so
Yeah.
I think with all this stuff, it's an interaction and you can't, I think that you can't say don't use stuff. I think you have to use it with the knowledge of it.
Yeah.
Because, I've been looking for a job and they teach you at NovaWorks, yes, you need to use AI, to do this. You want to do your cover letters with AI. You want to do your resume with AI. And so going out into the workforce, if we tell people you can't do this, then we're making some people who don't get access to AI at home because, we have students from, East Palo Alto, different places that don't have access to these things. If they don't learn how to use these things, if may not learn it at home, then we're putting them further at disadvantage.
Exactly. Yeah. There's even more digital divides if people don't have access to
It is getting
AI.
bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also, to that point of, and this kind of connects what you're saying with Robert's point earlier, is you really have to it requires self-awareness, right? Of like, what is my actual goal? Is my goal to just get through this assignment as quickly as possible? Okay, generative AI, help me out. Is my goal to actually learn the material? Okay, I might ask generative AI a different question in that sense. You know what I mean? So really having that awareness of what it is I'm trying to get out of this interaction, right? This engagement, I think is super important. And that's kind of what I think the new skill is like that metacognitive, like self-awareness. Like, what is it that I'm trying to get out of my interaction with this tool? Also acknowledging having the self-awareness that some of us might be burnt out and don't have capacity to always ask these big questions. But so I do, I want to transition into some like concrete activities. And those of you who've done some of my workshops before might recognize these. They are repeated, but I do think that they're really interesting. And I had some really interesting responses this quarter. The first thing that I would recommend is, even if you don't have any policy, you don't have any assignments, anything that's related to AI, you should at least start the conversation in your classes because it does help develop that metacognitive awareness. So in my like sort of introductory quiz survey where I ask students, what are your challenges? I also have 2 questions. How do you feel about using ChatGPT or other LLMs for your assignments for class? And then how do you feel if your work is graded by ChatGPT? And it's such a great discussion point because can you guess what they say for the first question? How do you feel about using it as a student? Yeah, it was fine. I use it every day. I had one student this morning who was like, I couldn't imagine not using it. I use it every day. Like, how would you not use it? Like, it's just, I always ask it for, advice. Same student. Second question. What do you think they said?
How dare you? That would be
Okay, words that come, I would feel cheated. I would feel betrayed. I would feel like it wouldn't understand me as a human. One student even said, I would wonder what the heck I'm actually paying for with education. So I was like, okay. And then even just having that conversation is a really great way to just think about why do we have these 2 different standards? Like, why is it okay for students to use it? And especially another thing students said is, I wouldn't trust its grade or its output. And I was like, okay, flip that back to the first question. Like, why would you not trust it here, but trust it here? And
Would that be based on if
you did the work on ChatGPT and then it was graded on.
Yeah, some students said, they're like, well, if I use ChatGPT to write it, I guess it's fine for
Right,
ChatGPT
yeah.
to grade it. And I'm like, okay, thanks for being honest.
What comes up for me is, I would be okay as long as it's my ChatGPT.
The one that's already trained on yours.
But other than that, I mean, honestly, I think that a chat GPT could likely provide better feedback than some teachers.
Yeah.
They say that's a great job.
Yeah, it's
It's
more
very
timely, yeah. Yeah, some of us still have some grading to get through. Yeah, no, yeah, and actually some students do say that, yes, it would have bias with grading, but so do humans, right? I was just reading the comment in the chat, but also some students said, oh, I think it would be too harsh because it would only look at grammar. And I was like, okay, you don't know how LLMs work and how we can like train them and like give them our rubrics and stuff. So it's also a great way to tell them like, this is actually, it's not just grading, like put it in and tell me if this has an A. Like you can actually like fine tune or, you know, add more like context to the interaction so that it could grade better if that's something that you wanted to do. But to me, the comment that really sticks out is when students say, I would feel like cheated because a human is not reading my work, they wouldn't understand my emotion, you know, they don't understand like who I am as a person. And then I turn that back to the first question and I was like, well, then why do you want a machine to give voice to you, you know, and like kind of fit your humanness into this box, like this predictable box that sounds like everybody else.
So how do you make space for the students who may respond to that question of, I don't like AI because it's unethical, it's stealing people's work, it's the environmental concerns? I mean, how do we make space for those individuals?
Yeah, I always have an option to not for, and even with stuff that where the students are invited to use it for an assignment, I also say like, here's an option where you don't use it. Because I think that's a valid concern too, right? And it's not just students, faculty have that. Like some faculty, like, I don't want to use it for my work because I think my lesson plan is the greatest thing ever made, and I don't want like it to train, you know, OpenAI's models, you know, and that's real, you know. So yeah, I validate that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so another sample activity is critiquing generative AI's output. This one's always fun, especially with image generation, because then there's so much to talk about. So here's an example of, you know, because I like to just see how does AI think I should look. So I gave it a prompt. I was like, I asked Dolly, generate an image of an Asian American female teacher in front of a classroom. And this is what I got. Okay. And what's even better is then it also gives you the description, right? So, you know, and it's good for what's it called? Alt text too. An image of an Asian American female teacher standing in a classroom. She has a warm, approachable smile and is dressed in professional attire. Okay. And I don't know, yeah, sure, that seems accurate, right? But I have to, I mean, because I also teach ethnic studies in addition to English. So I asked the students, I'm like, how do the image's characteristics reflect stereotypes or biases about race or ethnicity, right? Gender, class, religion, sexuality, education level, right? Why does she have to have a warm, approachable smile, right? You know, especially as a female, you know, if I asked for a male teacher, would he look professional if he wasn't smiling, right? And what is it about females that they have to be smiling? Why this classroom, right? It kind of looks like probably like elementary school, right? So why would an Asian American teacher only be like depicted as teaching elementary school, right? Why not like like a high school classroom or a college classroom, right? I didn't say what grade level, but the assumption is that, you know, oh, she must be teaching younger kids, you know? Yeah.
Did you run the same prompt with different ethnicities and genders?
I did, and I had the student do it too. Yeah. But it was for Asian American studies, so most of them were just, I was like, yeah, you know, look at Asian American and Pacific Islander, which was also interesting because imagine what Pacific Islander look like. A lot of them were like, you know, big, bulky, like sort of had that, what's his name?
Maori.
Yeah, 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 or Maui, yeah, from Moana, right? That kind of, oh, what, The Rock? I can't remember. Sorry.
Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, Dwayne Johnson. Thank you. Right. But then it's also a way, you know, for them to think about what, like, what are the sort of social stereotypes and expectations that we have for certain professions, for certain genders and races. But then I also asked them, like, what might this tell you about the model's training data, right? Like, where does the training data come from? Like, where does, it's not just that it digested like all of our stereotypes, but like, where did that data come from? So that they think about, it's not just like it pulls it out of the ether and makes this image, but that there is actual data that leads to this type of depiction. Is there a question? Okay. All right.
I do think that obviously the programmer who created the data, and not only just the race, but the sexual orientation as well.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, will an Asian woman produce that image of an Asian teacher, or compared to what a white man would produce as or program as.
Yeah.
And so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if we think about also like the data piece, so there was an article in the Washington Post, which I don't read anymore because of Jeff Bezos, where it asks for, sorry, I have to throw that in. Well, this is being recorded. Where it looks at like, the stereotypical depictions, and I think it used Stable Diffusion, and it put in prompts like, generate an image of, a working man or something, like a professional man, and it was a white man, glasses, wearing like button-up shirt, sitting at a desk, but it looks like one of those like open floor plan, like tech desks or whatever. And then it asked another prompt was like, show a picture of someone at social services, right? And it was a, African or Black presenting woman, right? Who looked sort of like, had not much makeup, or, like hair was kind of disheveled. And it was interesting because the data, like the census data, says that actually white folks use social services more than Black folks. And yet the stereotypical depiction was that, when it was prompted, generated an image of a Black woman as someone who uses social services, right? So we have to think about like, what is the data? Is it just like image representations because, this is an image generator? It's not based on the actual like census data, those kinds of data. And there's also, kind of back to your point, there's a great book called Algorithms of Oppression. A lot of people have been talking about it. Came out a long time ago. I used to teach it back in the day, about just search engine results, right? If you look up, like, if you just type in the word like Black girls, like the first, several hits will be pornographic depictions or, sites like pornographic sites. Same for Latinas and Asian women. And the other reason I bring this up is because if you know that, then you can do something about it, right? Like we do have agency, even if we're just users of the technology. So another example I often give is UN Women ran a campaign. It's called the Autocomplete Truth. And it was like probably more than like 10 or 15 years ago. But when you would type in women shouldn't, it would autocomplete like women shouldn't drive, right? Or women shouldn't, leave the house or something like that. And because of that campaign that they ran, Google actually put in guardrails so that it wouldn't produce those kinds of autocompletes anymore. And so that's what, I think it's really important to tell our students and tell ourselves is that if we know how these tools work, we can do things to mitigate some of these harms, right? We don't have to take it as fact, like, oh yeah, these are just stereotypes because that's how everybody thinks about Asian women teachers. Like, no, we could push back and say, I don't look like that, right? I don't always have a warm, approachable smile. Sometimes I have my resting bee face, you know what I mean? Like, and that's okay. Like people are like nuanced and complicated and have many layers. And so that's why we have to keep talking about these things. Cool, okay, good. Okay, I think I have one more example, and then I'm gonna tie it all together and then we can do Q&A. So one more sort of sample activity is promoting information literacy. First thing I have students do is create a persona, and it can be it can be themselves, or they can make something up, especially if they're concerned about their identities training models. They create a persona, 10 characteristics. It could be like age, race, where they live, what their favorite food is, you know, what they want to be in life, like do as a career, those kinds of things. They have to have at least 10 characteristics. And they have to ask an LLM to provide 2 lists of news sources based on that persona with an explanation of why it chose those 2 different news sources, right? So here's an example that I gave my students. I said, I'm a 20-year-old Asian American woman who was born in Cupertino. Already, none of this is true. I mean, I'm Asian American, but the rest is not true. And woman, yeah, identifies as a woman. Graduated from public high school, currently attend a community college. I like reading manga and watching anime and Korean dramas. My favorite color is blue. One day I'd like to travel to Europe, blah, blah, blah. So you can just create like a sort of user persona and then ask it, based on this information, please give me 2 different lists of recommendations for where I should get my news. Each list should prioritize different aspects of my personality. And for each list, please provide a brief explanation of why you chose those specific sources, right? Because we can ask the models to do that now, you know, kind of explain your reasoning. And here's just a little screenshot of some of what it said, you know, pop culture happy hour from NPR, Crunchyroll news, is because of all the Asian stuff I put in there, Korea Boo. And it's fascinating because, you know, one, it generates 2 different lists and it gives you its explanations for why. And then what I have students do is write a reflection. Do you agree with the recommendations? Why do you think it recommended these things? What does it tell you about other recommendation algorithms that you might engage with? And how does it craft a certain like information ecosystem based on who it thinks you are? Okay. And students are kind of fascinated by it. They're like, oh, I didn't, you know, and they kind of assume that, oh, I think it was this characteristic that made it like recommend this thing, or I would never get my news from that place, or, you know, I put this one aspect of an identity in there and I don't know why it just like latched onto that and gave me a bunch of news sources. And then they really have to reflect on, what does this tell me about where I get my information now? I think what's interesting, yeah, and Paul was saying it'd be interesting to feed that into different models. Yes, I agree. Like try different models. Perplexity is one that people like to use a lot for research. And I think if you were to apply this in your classroom, you know, I have to do information literacy and critical thinking for my English classes. But let's say that you're teaching history, like put in a persona and then say, now give me a bunch of lists of sources on like the Civil War, right? And tell me why you gave me those sources. Or let's say you're a math student, like explain, you know, this math, I'm not a math person, explain X math concept, right? Based on what you know about me as a person, right? And then have the students reflect on it, or even for yourselves, like reflect on it. Why did it give you these things? Yeah, the tariff formula. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say one more thing about this and I just forgot. Anyway, well, so I just think that it's important to kind of think about, oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. For students who don't want to use LLMs, right, who are just like, I am super anti like engaging with ChatGPT, I say just kind of put an abbreviated version of this in a Google search, right? News sources for an Asian American 20-year-old, right? Something like that, which unfortunately is also AI, but that's one way that if you don't want to use the LLMs, you can use it that way. Yeah.
I was intrigued with the information about my favorite colors, blue, and what would come up if you said you liked certain colors.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I just put that in there because, oh, well, that is true. Blue is my favorite color.
Oh, right, that sounds kind of fun.
Yeah. I just wanted to see, like, how is that gonna weight the model?
But I would need to explain in relation to blue, white.
Yeah, and maybe if I asked it a different prompt instead of news sources, like, you know, give me a list of vacation places I should visit, you know, and maybe blue is more relevant in that case. Yeah, good question. All right, any other questions or comments?
Do you have your students use different LLMs?
I do, yeah. And I let them use whichever one they want, they just tell me
I mean,
why.
just for the same assignment, use 3 or 4 different ones to, you know, compare the search.
I haven't like made it explicit that they should choose different ones and compare and contrast them. I usually, when I do earlier when I would teach research, I would have them do compare and contrast with, they have to have a research question. They put it into the library website, into Google, and into an LLM. Yeah, because I feel like that's another way to promote critical thinking is the compare and contrast. Yeah, Another activity I have them do when I teach composition is they write something, they edit it with a human tutor at our writing and reading center, and then they have the exact same piece of writing and they edit it with like an LLM. And they have to reflect on what they liked and didn't like about each experience and when they might choose one over the other. Because I think that it's really important not to just say you have to choose one over the other, but again, to have more nuance over like, what task do I want to accomplish in this interaction? Let's say they're like, yeah, and a lot of students reflected, editing something with the LLM was great for fast feedback and for just like polishing the writing. And they said, a lot of them said they actually preferred to work with a human tutor because they felt like somebody understood what they were trying to say. They felt like they could give more context in terms of what the assignment was asking and like kind of having someone to bounce ideas off of. So I think it's really important, again, because I teach writing. I was in conversation with another English teacher who does a lot of AI work, Anna Mills, and we were just saying like, when we write because we want to communicate with another human being. And I think that's the important thing to remember when our students, or when we're asking anybody, right, to communicate with us, we're asking them to show up in some human form to tell us what is happening inside of them in their head or what they're thinking. And how do we engage with that as a human, right? And so I'll just say I've moved to different grading systems because I try to value more of like that human growth and human experience than just like, okay, did you write this? Was it 5 pages? Was it, 5,000 words, whatever, Any other? Yeah, great question. I only have one more slide and then we'll like have broader questions. Kind of a big slide though. What are the stakes for doing this work? Like why should we care about ensuring or promoting critical thinking with generative AI? I mean, we've already alluded to it a lot, but what is the state of education in 2025? And how is that connected to the choices that people have made based on the information that they were given by certain tools, right? Like, how did we end up where we are in this climate of burnout and sort of like distrust and anxiety? And again, not to say that everybody is struggling. Maybe you're living your best life right now and you're just like loving it. That's, good for you. Like, bring us along with you. Right? But like, if we really think about how did we get to a place where, I'll just speak for myself, like I, as a faculty member, am tired and I'm also afraid, right, of what changes, how the changes in like education system and policy are going to affect me, right? Worried about folks losing their jobs, worried about folks losing their ability to study in this country, right? Or their ability to work in this country. And so thinking about how does education like help us through this time, right? At a time when education is also under attack, right? So again, like I know these are really big questions, but if we really want to think about the stakes of critical thinking, it's like, how do we in the education system, either as educators, as students, admins, like decision makers, how do we ground ourselves again in the purpose of education to promote and maintain and foster like a society of people who can think critically about their world, who can have self-awareness to understand like, why is the world the way it is and how do I see myself in it and what do I want to get out of it? And hopefully encourage people to think, how can I get what I want out of this world, out of my time on it, while doing the least amount of harm to other living things, right? Like, I think that that's really important. And I feel like because so many of us are just like, this is our world, it's really hard to see. I mean, yes, when I'm on my phone, I feel connected to people. When I'm on my device, I feel connected to people. But it's very different than the ways I used to feel connected to people, right? Like, yes, when I'm on my phone, I'm connected to my mom back on the East Coast. I'm connected to my friends in Manila. I'm connected to, like all the issues that are going on in the world. And yet when I'm out in the world, like, looking at the trees, Foothill is so green. Like, I drove down 280 and I was like, wow, the clouds are rolling in. Like, there's a way that we experience the world in like this, like in different ways. And how do we maintain that connection? And how does critical thinking help us remember that this is why we're doing what we're doing, right? Comment, question.
I think what you're saying is true for you and for probably millions and gazillions of people now, is we're always living in two worlds. You and I are here in real time, and at the same time, we have the remote people. And then you have your phone, so we're always kind of, I guess, a little bit fragmented in a way. And I think you're also touching on, let's not lose the analog experience of the world and get totally immersed in digital. Is like you said, go to the library or write something or talk with somebody. These are more like analog things rather than this remote digital. There's a different energy, I think, when you're communicating digitally. I mean, you can still connect, but it's not quite the same, is it? I don't know if I have the words to express it.
No,
It doesn't quite feel, something's missing, right? Like the legs maybe for one.
I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, I'm not saying that like, okay, let's all, throw our laptops out of the window and like, just, live off the land and go off the grid. Cause I mean, look at how many people we have on Zoom compared to how many people we have in this room. Like, there's an amount of access that is created with these digital tools. So it's not that we just pick one or the other. Like, it's more about the nuance. Like, what are the strengths of a digital space, right? And digital tools. And what are the strengths of analog spaces and analog tools, and when do we choose one or the other? I feel like those are the new critical thinking skills. It's not just about like, oh, AI is bad, like, let's get rid of it. It's like, well, like some things work, some things don't. How do we make the things that don't work better? And how do we keep the things that work and make those better too, right? So it's like, it's not, I don't want to come across as being like, a Luddite, which actually we should have a longer discussion of Luddites because they're actually not against technology, they were against inequality. Longer discussion. But yeah, like, again, like, how do we make it so these tools don't like exacerbate the burnout and the harm and the inequality? How do we use these tools to like uplift and encourage and build, in better ways? I was gonna say one more thing. Okay. All right. So yay, perfect. We have like 15 or so minutes. Questions or comments? I don't know if folks on Zoom were putting stuff in the chat or.
There have been just ongoing things. So
Okay.
if people have things, go ahead and either come off mute or put them in the chat. I was wondering, I love your assignments, and when you come across students, like I feel this way myself, and maybe that's why I identify with it, is I am cautious about using these LLMs because I don't want to put all my personal stuff out there and like have it. And I know a lot of my stuff is already out there, so that's not the issue, but more, how much am I voluntarily putting out more? So for students who are really anti-information sharing and all that, how do you, like I heard you saying, use Google for some of them, or how do you negotiate if you're gonna have to use it for this assignment, what do you do? And
So for example, that one assignment where I had them revise something with a tutor and revise something with an LLM, I said, if you really don't want to use an LLM, come to my office hours and I will do a demo where I'll put it into my Copilot because, well, the other thing when I do the FHDA workshops, like use the enterprise Copilot because then that has the protections around our data. So I say, come to my office hours and we'll demo through the enterprise version so that your data is protected. It's contained within our enterprise AI, whatever. And then write the reflection on that. So that's one example. I've actually had students who are, because I had a visual rhetoric assignment where students had to create selfies and like 2 different selfies and talk about what they're trying to argue in those. And a student was very adamant. This was even before generative AI. the student was like, I do not want an image of myself on Canvas. And I was like, okay, come to my office and just bring me the images, you know? So again, it's like trying to figure out when is the appropriate time to use those tools. If you really don't want to put them online anywhere, like then you also have to try to make yourself available to give it to like me, the analog physical copy.
Yeah, and then how much do you do the education of, well, this is the impact of putting your stuff out there? Like, if we have a lot of fear, then
Yeah.
really it's one drop in like a humongous
Huge
ocean.
bucket,
It doesn't
yeah.
matter. I don't know, like, how much do you do that to?
Like how much do I talk about it with the students?
Yeah, just help build their own critical thinking about
Yeah,
that.
well, there was a really, this is also pre-generative AI. This woman did an experiment where she tried to hide her pregnancy from big data. I don't know if anyone's read it. Her name was Janet Vertesi, Vertesi. And she basically found out that like, if you try to hide your data, you look like a criminal. Cause she had to buy like strollers and stuff off of like, what is it, like Silk Road before, you know, she had to create a PO box to have Amazon gift cards delivered so that she could pay for things with Amazon gift cards and have them delivered to an anonymous PO box. So it's really, I mean, it was a great experiment. And this was, again, like many, many years ago, probably like more than 10 years ago. So it's gotten worse now. But I do think it's a really great question, especially because, you know, if any of you travel, you've probably read the articles about how to protect your digital data when you're traveling because, you know, certain places are doing searches of your digital devices. So it's an important question to ask. And I do think that it's good for students to have better data governance practices just around their own stuff. Like I have another assignment I have is I tell students, I was like, imagine 5 years from now, there's no like Spotify or there's no, you know, like Google image search. How would you like tag a photo that you have taken that you know you're gonna wanna find again in 5 years, but you don't have like the search functionality, right? How would you catalog it for yourself? It's basically like findability, like searchability stuff. But like, how would you archive it? Like, what are the ways that you would organize that information so that you could find it? And it requires a certain amount of metacognition because you have to think about, well, do I remember things based on location? Do I remember things based on time period? Right? So those are just things that like they have to think about, like what would be my journey towards finding an artifact? And then they're like, holy, you know, whatever, I have so many photos, right? I have so many songs on my Spotify. Like they really have to think about like, how do they save that information, tag that information, make it findable for themselves later, which requires understanding their own thinking processes. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's,
No, it's all like super interesting.
yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
I acknowledge all the benefits and values of the use of AI in our daily life, including classrooms. But I'm afraid that use of AI in our classroom actually takes the opportunity away for our students to have the conscious of their challenges or conscious of their incompetence. Because when they just see the answers in generative AI or whatever they are using, that gives them a false impression that they know it without really they are struggling. So conscious incompetence, they should have the opportunity, right, to have, but the AI easily take their opportunity. For my students, I ask them not to read someone else's case or solutions before they actually try and struggle enough. But it's so tempting to just see the answers in an AI, so they don't actually have the time to think about it themselves. So that critical thinking or just thoroughness or struggleness or whatever you can say. So conscious incompetence, that opportunity AI takes over from the students. That's my one of the greatest fear even though I acknowledge all the benefits of use of AI.
Yeah, and that's totally valid. And actually in the study, they did talk about how there was a decrease in critical thinking when the users trusted the output of AI more, because there wasn't that sense of like, I have to check this work, right? And then they're offloading that sense of I should check whether or not I even agree with this solution. And that's why I think it's important to acknowledge that that could be a tendency for students. And so then to say, if you're going to use AI to answer this question, get at least 5 different answers, right? Ask 5 different LLMs or ask for 5 different ways of solving this problem, and then have them decide which one they thought was better. You know, because then they start to reflect a little bit more on, oh, there isn't just one way to solve this problem. There are multiple ways to solve this problem. And I get to think about what is it that I need to know in order to like actually solve this problem well. But I agree, yeah, it's, you know, if they rely on just the first output, then yeah, they're not, it's gonna be a lot harder to develop critical thinking. I saw Sarah.
Hi, my name is Mike and I teach business classes here. I'd like to know, how is AI helping students become how is AI teaching them the soft skills to work in teams?
That's a good.
To actually interview with someone face to face for a $200,000 a year job in Silicon Valley. The person has the skills. The boss needs that person, but I don't see how AI is going to help that person convince the boss to close the deal to get the hire. I haven't heard any of that yet. I allow my students to use AI to create their presentations, but AI isn't going to give the presentation.
Right.
Those 5 kids have to get up there, work as a team, look like one cohesive unit, and speak with one voice. And I don't see how AI is doing that with job preparation, helping me with the interview, closing the deal, teaching the soft skills.
I agree. And I think that's why we still need teachers, right? Because education is not just like knowledge transfer, right? It's not just like, let me get that information out of this person's head or this article and dump it in my brain. Education is inherently social, right? I think that we learn when we realize that we're in community. And I think that's the soft skills are what teachers and the classroom or like a classroom experience is still for. And I don't want AI to automate that. I don't think it should, because I mean, you know, if anything, we can teach students like how to not be jerks, how to work in teams. Yeah.
I let the students use AI to generate the presentations, and the graphics and words and music are beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's up to the students to actually look at the slide, create in their head their version of what they're trying to present, and make it look and sound professional and believable and hireable.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like I opened with, we have to understand there's nuances in the kinds of tasks we can offload to generative AI. You know, like, yes, creating the presentations, getting good graphics, but you have to know what you want first in order to know that you're getting what you want. And that requires self-reflection. And then presenting in a group. Yeah, that's something that I don't think can be offloaded yet.
So it's kind of a counterpoint. So I'll talk on behalf of like the aerospace industry in terms of, and it's very international, right? So when you put up satellites, any kind of satellite, it has a lifespan of 3 to 5 years. So what I'm seeing lately is that companies basically interviewing students, and this is from experience from people that I know who are also aerospace engineers. What they want is design me a satellite in the shortest amount of time that will have a life expectancy of 10 to 15 years and design a propulsion system that will last that long in a zero gravity environment and use all the AI tools you can. So in reality, what they're doing is they're asking how many AI tools can you use to design an aerospace system. So it's kind of the opposite, and I get your point, but I think going forward, in the practical industry, and I say this because I worked in the industry for like 20 years, I think the use of the AI tools is taking place worldwide. And it's just like the calculators or laptops when they were first introduced. Like when I went to high school, they had just left behind slide rules. And they said, use caution, you cannot use it for testing and so on. But now what I see is that some of the forward-looking industries, they're pushing AI as much as possible. There are companies now who are doing 95% of their coding in AI, so they could care less if you speak Java or C++, whatever. How quickly can you design code to do something that's like 99.9999% reliable?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the opposite. Yeah, it's good for certain fields, but in certain industries, they are asking to basically become a subject matter expert on all AI tools.
But, and I think that's a really great point. And I didn't put this in the introduction, but I'm also currently a student at Columbia doing information and knowledge strategy. And actually taking a knowledge management class right now with somebody who works at NASA. And I think, yes, exactly. They're asking, write me the code to build a satellite, but satellites don't just get built with code, right? You actually have to have the political and institutional savvy to know, who do I need to ask for funding? How do I talk to the engineers? How do I get the engineers to talk to the marketing team? How do I procure the right thing? So there's still, even though there's like technical pieces that can be outsourced to AI, there's a lot of like human interaction that still is required to actually get the thing built and put it in space, right? And so I think that, I feel like these two perspectives actually like work together.
Right.
That, yeah, there's tasks that, technical things that can be offloaded, but to actually get the thing done, built, like, with the, again, the analog, like the materials, the physical stuff, it requires actually talking to people and being like, oh yeah, that manager does not like me. Somebody else has to ask them for money, right? Like there's all of that as well. I know there are a couple more hands. Yes.
So I have a question related to the use of AI versus totally online classes versus hybrid classes versus in-person classes. And don't get a big head, Mr. Semblin.
Oh, what's the backstory of that?
I learned a lot. I think I learned calculus better when it was in person. And we had some teamwork where we had to work with other students. And we didn't have AI to do our homework.
Yeah.
And we had study groups in the STEM center. And we learned, to communicate. And it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I ran into, one of the students I had in this class, and we still knew each other, right?
Yeah.
And there's that social connection, which is, good, right?
Yeah.
And it helps you get jobs of that. And I'm just wondering, there's a big push, and I know it's a lot more convenient, to take, calculus in my pajamas, but, it's better for me to actually come in person and interact, because social disconnection is a big problem of our society, and I think it's getting worse.
Yeah.
And when you get older, that leads to dementia and all kinds of crap.
Right.
But so I'm just wondering, I don't know, maybe we need to pull in at least more hybrid type classes or some real connection. So.
I'm not the scheduler, so. But yeah, I think
I totally agree, she said.
and I think that's really important to recognize of like what are the best conditions for you to learn in. And I think a lot of students or even faculty are like, what are the best conditions for you to teach in? Yeah, in my pajamas. But like, we really have to think about what is the goal, right? If the goal is to actually learn the material, then yeah, talking in groups about it, weekly or regularly, it helps a lot with like information processing and retention versus just like, okay, let me click through every slide and then like take a quick, and so knowing that about yourself is important. But I think also just like, sorry, I got distracted. Knowing that like the questions themselves are going to be different in terms, so I'm going to give you an example. My youngest is a senior in high school, and he wants to major in computer science, and he loves to play video games, 18-year-old boy. But his thing right now is he's like, I am training a bot to beat Tetris. And I'm like, why would you, like, don't you enjoy playing Tetris? Like, why do you just want to play Tetris? But it's like, I feel like the old ways of doing things was like playing Tetris. Yeah, that was fun. But the new game is like, how do I get a machine to know how to play Tetris? Like that in and of itself is the new game, right? And so it's kind of like the same thing with education in the sense of there were ways like, yeah, you could like read and, take a quiz and show learning, but now it's more like, how do I, given like I have these new capabilities, how do I reframe the exercise, the task, to get different kinds of learning out of it? And also the self-awareness of knowing like, I actually learn better in an in-person setting versus an online setting, that's the self-awareness. I see. Okay, that.
You go boss first, and I'll wrap you.
Yeah. I know, are you gonna give us the backstory on the comment about the?
She took some classes.
Oh,
with me. I was a math instructor, right? Which before online was its fad and why
Okay.
COVID obviously amplified the online presence in
Yeah.
education. But yeah, I've seen some of the comments and stuff in chat, like, man, it's sad that these, like for instance, computer science, right? You look at our schedule, a vast majority of our computer science classes are online. You might think, why is that? It's because when we offer classes in person, no one signs up to take the classes. And so why is that, right? Are really all of those students that are not enrolling in an in-person class really from outside the area? I highly doubt it, right? But there will be a chunk of that. I mean, there's many factors that go into this, and CS is a different monster than say like, astronomy or mathematics or all the different disciplines, right? And so I it's just like the access thing for students. Is the online learning really optimal for learning? Or should be like a training, like people take a Coursera training, you get a badge or something, right? And so to me, the access to the technology is very different in online, right? Than you are in person. Because if you're in person, I can regulate as an instructor how I'm going to see what you know right in front of me. And AI has its purpose in many ways to, I think, enhance learning. But I do wonder how certain instructors are not, in one way or another, incorporating the conversation about AI into those courses. Because to your point earlier, the goal of a student is to go do some other thing after they leave Foothill College or Anza, and they're going to quickly realize when they leave this college that they will be just expected to have some kind of understanding of how to use these tools to be productive. So by prohibiting them in doing that here, we're kind of actually doing a disservice. I think so, right? We don't have to fully embrace it in everything you do, but somehow it should be, I think, intertwined. So that's a little bit about that. It's just a comment also about why can't we have more in-person classes? Take the class and we'll put the class in the schedule.
I do think that's a lot of people don't know what's good for them, and obviously younger people do want to stay home in their pajamas to take their classes. So, I think, Stanford, other big colleges, definitely do have lectures that are in person. They're very popular. So, people don't know what's good for them sometimes.
Just ask my, social media history. I don't know, I spend way too much time on it, and because I don't know what's good for me, and I'm like, it's very easy to be on the device. And that's why I do think that the friction piece is kind of important. How do we encourage or kind of engineer a certain amount of friction without necessarily reducing access, right? And then
one other comment that I just had about this situation is that you also have to wonder why students don't want to come in person. A lot of people have social anxiety. A lot of people have disabilities. Are you making the classroom a place that is accessible in person for everyone? Are you making it a place where people feel comfortable talking and sharing in a group? If you're not, then maybe as an instructor, you should really think about what are you doing?
Thank you. We have one more question.
Not a question, a comment. You have made a comment about how does AI help, we're in a situation where you're interviewing for a job. And so this has something to do with something that happened to me about a year ago. Some friends of mine, we were in a room where we decided to Google a few things or use AI to answer a few things. And the questions were a black man is, I think I've said this before, a black man is and a white man is. And AI gave us two totally different opinions of what a black athletic, entertainer, gangbanger, drug dealer, and obviously the opposite for a white man. So that has a lot to do with, obviously we need to get people in there that is diverse and inclusive. But the whole thing about critical race theory is the idea that racism is a social construct, right? And that it being a social construct, it's not just individuals, but it's also systemic. It's in the policies and all that kind of stuff. And I say all that as to say, when I'm going someplace where I know I'm going to be seen as a 6'3", 300-pound black man, I can use AI and prompt it and ask it questions for me to know how to react in a certain situation. And I've known a lot of people that have lost their jobs over at NVIDIA and all these kind of places who actually does it. They say, I as a black man who is an engineer, and they'll prompt it to give them an opinion on how to act when they go into interviews. And it's all based on who's programming it. It's all based on critical race theory, and it's based on. And I just wanted to answer that part of your question.
Yeah, in preparation for the interview or to be able to read the room, it's important.
Yeah.
But if you're up in front of the class, you're part of an Oracle team and you're selling a $20 million software ERP solution to a Lockheed Martin or a Boeing or an Applied Materials. You need to already have that in the back of your mind, and everybody on your sales and marketing team has to be on their game and bring their A game to close that deal. Because when you walk out of the room and you didn't read the room properly, and AI is not going to teach you how to read the room. You're going to be looking at all those faces.
In a way it will. They have programs right now, what we talk about vibe. They have programs right now that can get detailed into ideologies, concepts.
Yeah, but you gotta have
Computer
that.
vision, the transition from weak AI to general AI, it's all coming from robotics. Just being.
All right, yeah, wow, thanks everybody for the comments and really great discussion. Thanks for tuning in on Zoom. If you have a chance, grab the QR code so you can fill out the survey. Let us know how we did.
I'm taking the
Okay, and thanks everybody.
now I
think
can
Thank you,
that's-
Chesa. Thank you very much.
Yeah.